All right, First Unitarian. So for several years now, we have been trying to get real about racism that is built deeply into the fabric and structure of America. And I think as a community, we've done pretty well in our learning about that, in our growing general awareness of racism and how it is built into the fabric and the structure of our country, our culture, our language, our world. This morning, I want to talk about another closely related and equally devastating aspect of American culture, although I really hope this is not going to be a devastating sermon in any way, shape, or form. I want to talk about the kind of greed that leads to the kind of income inequality that we have been witnessing, the acceleration to the point of absurdity now here in this country for about the last 50 to 60 years. I have learned, as I've thought about this and looked around at this, that if you do an internet search on the psychology of greed, you'll find that unlike other characteristics like memory and grief and love or political preferences, greed has not been studied extensively. There's not a lot of data or science behind it, and what that means is that the many articles that you come across as you research the psychology of greed means that you find the same studies that have been done, you find them referenced over and over and over again. One of them that gets referenced often was an experiment done at the University of California. There's a TED Talk about this by Professor Paul Piff. What they did is they brought random people in pairs and sat them down for a game of Monopoly. But they rigged the game. One player starts out with twice as much money as the other player, and that player also gets the customary 2 dice to roll, whereas the other player only gets 1 dice to roll. The player with 2 dice and all the extra money gets to collect twice as much money when they pass go every time as the other player does. And they've rigged this room with cameras, and as the game proceeds, the researchers watch the facial expressions and the body language and how the relationships in the room begin to change. And what they saw is that the player with all the advantages, after a very short time of being mildly apologetic, becomes increasingly aggressive, becomes increasingly rude and dismissive, even in very subtle ways. Their body language becomes more dominant, more forceful. They even move their pieces around the board with noticeably more force as they buy up everything in sight and collect rent from their much poorer compatriots. It gets worse. When the participants are asked later about their experiences playing this rigged game, the player who had all the advantages doesn't tend to talk about all the advantages they had, even after they caught on that that's what was happening. They talk about how strategic they were and how they made good decisions and how the other players just weren't that much fun to be around. Another study had pedestrians near a busy intersection start crossing the street when cars were coming. And the results of that study were unequivocal. Turns out that the most expensive cars were the same cars that were least likely to stop or even slow down for the pedestrian. Turns out the least expensive cars were the most likely to be aware of the pedestrian and even to smile and wave at the pedestrian as the pedestrian crossed the street. Other studies have shown, again, the data is pretty unequivocal, that the wealthier a person is, the more successful they have been, for instance, in the business world or such, the more likely they are to cheat, even when they don't need to. And it's a well-known fact that although wealthy people do give to charities, they give far less than poor and working people do as a percentage of their income and wealth, typically less than 1%. There are many exceptions, of course, but the overall data is absolutely clear. Some of this is cultural here in the United States, and some of it's political. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that our system of democracy here in the United States is enmeshed with our system of capitalism, and our system of capitalism is ruthless, steeped in the values of individual achievement and greed, far away and above and beyond any considerations of community or the common good. And these cultural values, they run deep. If you need an example, just look at who just received the second most votes of anyone in history to be President of the United States, a man whom most everyone recognizes as shallow and dishonest, who was impeached for putting his own interest above that of the country, and that he swore to serve, and openly brags about gaming the system so he doesn't have to pay taxes. And this country, almost half of it, still voted for him. These things run deep in our culture. One other thing you'll find if you research the psychology of greed is that there's quite a few psychologists who think of greed as a form of addiction and or obsessive-compulsive disorder. I'm guessing that the psychologists who think that are not themselves wealthy. Religion, on the other hand, is quite clear that greed is not good. Jesus, Buddhism, the Quran, Shintoism, Taoism, Judaism, all traditional religions, as far as I know, warn against greed. Jesus says, and I quote, "It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven." And the Apostle Paul is unequivocal in the book of Timothy. The love of money is the root of all evil. Not sure I totally agree with that, but Apostle Paul was quite clear. Buddhism, likewise, absolutely clear that the path to enlightenment comes from letting go of the pain that attachments cause the human spirit. But to get where I'm going, I'm going to share one of my favorite Taoist teaching stories. One day, a thief came to a well-known teacher and asked, "Would you take me as a student? But one thing I have to be clear about, I'm a thief and I cannot leave being a thief, so please don't make that a condition. I'll do whatever you say, I'll do whatever meditation, whatever disciplines you say. I just can't stop being a thief. I just need to be clear about that with you." The teacher said, "Who's going to ask you about being a thief?" The thief said, but whenever I approach a teacher about being a student, they tell me I have to stop stealing." The teacher laughed. "You must have gone to thieves then. Otherwise, why would they be concerned?" "I'm not concerned." The thief was very happy. He said, "Oh, you are the teacher for me." The teacher accepted him and gave him some initial instruction and said, "Now, go and do whatever you like, only one condition. You must be aware. You must practice awareness. Go on, go break into houses, take things, do whatever you like. That's of no concern to me. Just do it with full awareness." The thief did not understand he was falling into a trap. He came back after 3 weeks and he said, "Oh, you are a tricky teacher, because if I become aware, I cannot steal. And if I steal, awareness disappears." Teacher said, "No more talk about being a thief. Stealing, you decide. You want awareness? You decide. You don't want awareness? Again, you decide." Student said, "Oh, but you've made it difficult now. I have tasted awareness and it is so beautiful. Just the other night, for the first time, I was able to enter the palace of the king. I opened the treasure. I could have been the richest man in the world, but your words were in my head and I had to be aware. And when I became aware, the diamonds just looked like ordinary stones. And when I lost awareness, such riches. I did this many times back and forth. I would become aware and I could not even touch it because the whole thing looked so foolish, just stupid stones. What am I doing?" And then I would lose awareness and they would become beautiful again, the whole illusion intoxicating. But I finally decided they just weren't worth it. What is this awareness that lets the thief see past the greed? What is it exactly that our current president and many of his supporters and the 10% of the population that own 90% of the wealth in America and apparently the monopoly players, what is it that they do not seem to have? What is that awareness that they seem to lack? I should probably warn you right now, I'm going to drop what I believe is a significant spiritual truth. I believe the awareness that we're speaking of is our inherent interdependence and connection with each other and with all that is. What I like to call, or to each other, to all that is, and to God, to the mystery at the heart of the universe. What I like to call the unity that makes us one. Awareness of the transitory nature of all physical things, including our individual fortunes. Awareness of a wonderful, blessed truth that everyone is a child of the universe. And we're all in this together, including the non-human life that we share this planet with. This deep knowing will change your life. Will change your life forever. And to the extent we can capture that awareness and keep it present, I believe we will be wholly and joyfully generous with all that we are and all that we have, because this awareness just simply won't let us do otherwise. Mother Teresa wrote, "We cannot do great things on this earth, only small things with great love." Now, the corollary to this, of course, is that to the extent that any one of us, or we as a community or a country, are unaware or oblivious or in denial about this beautiful, life-giving, mysterious, interconnected unity, that's the extent to which we will also be susceptible to greed and a merely self-serving life. And all of this is just one of the reasons why this community affirms at the close of every Sunday worship that behind all our differences and beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together in spite of time and death and the space between the stars. That unity is more than enough. Amen.